The 5 most dangerous and evil women in the Bible. Have you ever paused to wonder just how far someone might go when unchecked desires, thirst for power, or a hardened heart take over? When we open the pages of the Bible, we often find stories of faithfulness, courage, and redemption. But woven among them are accounts of individuals whose actions were far from virtuous. Today, we're going to look at 5 such women whose choices and conduct were so chillingly destructive. They've long been remembered as some of the most dangerous and evil in all Scripture. Even though the Bible also shows many examples of righteous and faithful women, these 5 stand out for the harm they caused and the darkness they embraced, in contrast to the divine ideals of love and justice. By examining what drove them and how their legacies echo through the ages, perhaps we can glean lessons for our own lives. Lessons on the peril of giving free rein to envy, anger, lust, greed, and a hunger for control. 1. Potiphar's wife. Have you ever considered how your everyday decisions could set into motion events that go far beyond your intentions? This very idea resonates in the story of Potiphar's wife, remembered for the false charges she made against Joseph. In ancient Egypt, Joseph was once just a young Hebrew slave, brought to serve Potiphar, a powerful officer of Pharaoh. But Joseph's competence and divine favor elevated him in Potiphar's household until he found himself managing everything his master owned. One might imagine the daily routine: Joseph orchestrating tasks, ensuring the house ran smoothly, answering to Potiphar in all matters of administration. Amid it all, Potiphar's wife grew captivated by Joseph's appearance and presence. Perhaps she was enthralled by the way Joseph carried himself, how his organizational talents impressed everyone, or simply by the allure of the forbidden. The book of Genesis says she cast her eyes on Joseph and plainly invited him to lie with her. Can you picture the moral tension in Joseph's mind? Here he was, a slave rising quickly, entrusted with power by a man who had shown him kindness. Yet this man's wife approached him with persistent temptation day after day, according to Genesis 39. Joseph's response was firm. Engaging in this act would offend both his earthly master and the God he served. When we read how Joseph refused time and again, we see the contrast between a woman who felt entitled to someone else's body and a man who took his moral obligations seriously. Finally, she cornered Joseph, grabbing hold of his garment when nobody else was around. Rather than yielding to sin, Joseph fled. The garment was left in her hand, and her anger and humiliation boiled over. She took that moment to twist the story, accusing him of assault, and Joseph, an innocent man, found himself in prison, stripped of the good standing he had earned. Perhaps she never paused to think that her lie would land him in a cell. But the beauty of the biblical account is how the darkest moments can still intersect with God's purposes. In prison, Joseph again rose to a position of trust, and in time, his ability to interpret dreams caught Pharaoh's attention. Ultimately, Joseph was elevated to second in command over all Egypt. Had Potiphar's wife never plotted her deceit, we might wonder if Joseph would have ever been in the right place, at the right time, to save countless lives from famine, including those of his own family. There is, in that story, a hint of irony. Potiphar's wife acted out of lust and manipulation, hoping to gratify herself or punish Joseph for resisting her. Yet, in the grand narrative, her plan became a stepping stone to Joseph's destiny. While she remains a chilling reminder of how reckless desire can devastate others, Joseph's life illustrates that no lie or betrayal can derail God's ultimate plan. 2. Delilah. If Potiphar's wife brought false charges out of desire, there are others who took their schemes a step further, selling out an entire nation's hero for profit. Enter Delilah, the woman who operated in the shadowy frontier between seduction and outright treachery. Imagine living in ancient Israel, a time of repeated clashes with the Philistines. Samson, the judge endowed with superhuman strength, was terrorizing these enemies of Israel. Delilah, residing in the valley of Sorek, attracted the attention of the Philistine rulers, who were desperate to end Samson's rampage. Perhaps she was charming. Perhaps she saw an opportunity for wealth. Maybe she felt a certain resentment for Samson's feats or had divided loyalties. Whatever the reason, Delilah accepted a hefty bribe of silver to uncover Samson's secret. Have you ever witnessed someone systematically wear down another person, pressing them for information until the target breaks? That was Delilah's tactic, persistently asking Samson the source of his strength, time and again, until his resistance was gone. At first, Samson toyed with her by giving false explanations. But as Judges 16 tells us, Delilah's insistence vexed his soul to death. It's unsettling how patience, persistence, and manipulation can unravel even the strongest. Finally, Samson confessed the truth of his Nazirite vow. His hair must remain uncut. Delilah, having achieved her objective, lulled him to sleep and called in a man to shave off his locks. In that instant, the mighty judge who had caused such terror to the Philistines was rendered powerless. Their moment of triumph came swiftly. They gouged out Samson's eyes, dragged him off to prison, and used him as a spectacle for their entertainment. And Delilah, we're told she was rewarded handsomely with silver. The Bible's silence on her subsequent fate leaves her among those haunting figures who vanish after committing irreparable damage. Yet it's sobering to note that the betrayal she orchestrated eventually ended with her own paymasters crushed. Samson, having regained his strength when his hair grew back, collapsed the Philistine temple, perishing with his enemies in one final act of defiance. What remains of Delilah's story is that she embraced treachery for gain, contributing to a national tragedy and sealing Samson's downfall. Some might call it cunning. Others call it evil incarnate. In either case, she stands as a cautionary tale of what greed and betrayal can do to even the mightiest among us. 3. Herodias. While Delilah's betrayal was aimed at one man, we turn now to a woman whose hatred was so singular, it ended the life of an honored prophet, Herodias, the woman who demanded the head of John the Baptist. Step into the lavish courts of King Herod Antipas for a moment. Picture the banquet halls, the dancing, the political wheeling and dealing as the tetrarch wined and dined influential guests. In this atmosphere, Herodias was no mere bystander. She was intricately linked to the Herodian dynasty. She'd been married to Herod Philip I and later married Herod Antipas, a scandalous move condemned under Jewish law. Enter John the Baptist, an ascetic prophet known for speaking uncomfortable truths. He dared to call out Herod and Herodias for their unlawful union, publicly declaring their marriage was not right before God. We might wonder how it stung Herodias to see her personal life scrutinized by this wilderness preacher. Mark's gospel shows us that Herod Antipas was conflicted about John. He arrested him yet found him intriguing, a righteous man worth listening to. Herodias, however, felt nothing but rage. Perhaps John's words stirred a sense of shame she refused to confront. Or maybe she worried about losing status and power. So she bided her time, letting her anger fester. Eventually, the perfect chance arose on Herod's birthday. Picture the scene. Feasting nobles, music, the flicker of torches, and Salome, Herodias' daughter, performing a dance that so delighted Herod he promised her anything, up to half his kingdom. We can almost see Herodias pulling Salome aside, whispering a deadly request. Ask for John the Baptist's head on a platter. Why such gruesome finality? Why not exile him? Why not embarrass him in some other way? Perhaps because Herodias wanted John silenced forever, to ensure he could never again condemn her. The king, trapped by his boastful vow, complied. An executioner was sent. John was beheaded, his head brought out in this macabre display, and thus Herodias fulfilled her desire for revenge. The shadow of that act has lingered through centuries, marking Herodias as a woman who would not rest until her adversary's blood was spilled. Yet what did it gain her in the end? Political fortunes shift quickly, and eventually, she and Herod faced a downfall when accusations of conspiracy led them into exile. The story doesn't show her repenting or facing a formal punishment for John's death, but it underscores how unchecked hatred can lead to a monstrous outcome. John was indeed silenced, but Herodias' legacy is forever stained. 4. Athaliah. As harrowing as the story of Herodias is, she pales in comparison to a queen who orchestrated one of the bloodiest purges in the biblical record. Athaliah, the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel. By the time Athaliah took center stage in Judah's history, she had inherited an appetite for power that mirrored her parents. After her husband Jehoram's death and her son Ahaziah's short reign, she saw her opening to seize the throne. The moment Ahaziah died, Athaliah initiated a massacre, ordering the killing of all possible heirs. Children, her own grandchildren included, fell under her sword. Can you imagine anything more shocking than a grandmother arranging the deaths of her own kin to secure a throne? Her cruelty, however, did not prevail without resistance. Unbeknownst to Athaliah, one baby grandson, Joash, was spirited away by his aunt, hidden in the temple of the Lord for 6 long years. During that time, Athaliah ruled with an iron hand, presumably continuing the idolatrous ways she'd inherited from her father Ahab and her mother Jezebel. Perhaps the people of Judah lived in fear, waiting for a spark of hope or a sign that this reign of terror would end. Eventually, the high priest Jehoiada, in a carefully orchestrated coup, presented the 7-year-old Joash to the people, proclaiming him the rightful king. The moment Athaliah heard the shouts of acclamation for the boy, she stormed into the temple, crying treason, but it was too late. The loyal guards and priests seized her, dragging her to her execution. The biblical narrative treats her demise as divine justice for her slaughter of innocent heirs, a final comeuppance for trying to obliterate the Davidic line. Athaliah's name now stands for the horrifying extremes a person can reach when driven by power at any cost, even to the point of murdering family members. She underscores just how far a heart can stray when guided solely by self-interest. 5. Jezebel. Yet as nightmarish as Athaliah was, many would say she was merely following the pattern set by the most notorious woman of all, Jezebel. If you've ever heard someone described as having a Jezebel spirit, you know the name has become shorthand for a manipulative, idolatrous, and supremely wicked individual. Jezebel was born a Sidonian princess, daughter of King Ethbal, and she grew up worshipping Baal. When she married Ahab, king of Israel, she introduced the worship of Baal and Asherah on a national scale. Picture an entire kingdom gradually succumbing to pagan rites, erecting altars and idols, and killing prophets of the Lord. This was the environment Jezebel created. She wasn't content to let Israel's religious practices remain diverse. She wanted Baal to eclipse Yahweh entirely. One of her darkest acts involved a man named Naboth, who owned a vineyard next to Ahab's palace. Ahab coveted this land, but Naboth refused to give it up, citing the inheritance laws that bound his property to his family line. Rather than respect Naboth's choice or negotiate further, Jezebel devised a sinister plan. She wrote letters in Ahab's name, arranging for false witnesses to accuse Naboth of cursing God and the king. The scheme worked. Naboth was stoned to death, and Ahab took over the vineyard. But the Lord's prophet, Elijah, soon confronted Ahab and Jezebel, pronouncing a dire prophecy. The dogs would devour Jezebel by the wall of Jezreel. This might have seemed unthinkable to a queen so steeped in power. But as with many tyrants, her end was waiting on the horizon. We see a final confrontation when Jehu, anointed by the prophet Elisha, rides into Jezreel to overthrow the house of Ahab. Jezebel, never one to cower, adorns herself in regal finery, perhaps believing she can enchant or intimidate Jehu. She calls out to him from a window, but his response is swift. He orders the eunuchs around her to throw her down. She is cast from the window, trampled by horses, and left for the dogs, just as Elijah had predicted. When they later went to bury what was left of her, all that remained were her skull, feet, and hands. It's a gruesome end that biblical writers present as a fitting judgment for a woman who slaughtered the prophets, promoted Baal worship, and orchestrated cruel injustices. While her story is horrifying, it's also cautionary. No earthly power or cunning can outrun divine justice forever. Conclusion. After hearing about Potiphar's wife, Delilah, Herodias, Athaliah, and Jezebel, you might wonder, what do we do with these stories today? Why should we dwell on episodes of such cruelty and deceit? One reason is that they warn us about the destructive path that opens when people reject godly virtues like compassion, honesty, and humility. Each of these women, in her own way, allowed desire, whether for lust, wealth, influence, vengeance, or all-consuming power, to override every moral restraint. They remind us that evil often begins with a smaller choice, a compromise that grows until it consumes everything around it. From a falsely shouted accusation to a secret betrayal to an all-out purge of the royal family, the escalation is frighteningly real. Yet these stories also underscore a larger biblical theme. Even in the darkest moments, God's redemptive plan can prevail. Potiphar's wife landed Joseph in prison, but that placed him on the path to saving nations. Delilah's betrayal led to Samson's captivity. Yet in the end, Samson took down the Philistine rulers. Herodias silenced John the Baptist, but the gospel message continued. Athaliah nearly destroyed the lineage of David, but the Davidic line was preserved through Joash. Jezebel's idolatry overtook much of Israel, yet her evil reign ended and the prophets of the Lord endured. No matter how imposing wickedness might appear, it does not have the final say. So what do we learn on a personal level from these sobering accounts? We're reminded to guard our hearts against destructive emotions and temptations, to stand up for truth rather than yield to the pressure of the crowd, and to remember that no pursuit of ambition or pleasure is worth the moral costs these women paid. Their stories encourage us to check our motives daily. Are we acting out of greed, revenge, or envy? Do we manipulate others to get what we want? Do we stand aside when we see innocent people harmed? Thank you for spending this time examining these lives and legacies. If you found this exploration valuable, I invite you to subscribe to this channel and share the message with someone who might also be intrigued. May we take to heart the lessons these women teach us. Lessons on resisting temptations that lead to harm, honoring God over selfish desires, and trusting in the ultimate triumph of His righteousness. God bless you, and may His guidance keep us all on a path that seeks truth, love, and genuine faith. Amen.